This is All Ears. I'm Everett Hopfner, pianist, new music explorer, and host of this podcast. On each episode of All Ears, you'll hear conversations with my musical friends, mentors, and the many people who inspire me. My guest for episode 20 is a brilliant Nova Scotian pianist and composer, Edward Enman. Edward and I met at the Everett competition in 2013, where I was certainly impressed by his positive attitude and his seemingly effortless, rich sound at the piano. He's now a doctoral student at the University of Montreal and has some really great insights on his musical journey to share. Our conversation is coming up right away. All Ears is a platform for young musicians to share their stories with a wider audience. New episodes are released twice a month. If you like the show, you can subscribe to the feed and you'll never miss an episode. And if you love the show, you can help All Ears by recommending it to a friend or leaving a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Thanks so much for your support. Now here's the interview. Edward, let me officially welcome you to All Ears and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be able to contribute.
Where is home for you?
I grew up in Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. Grew up on a farm in a rural community.
And what sort of resources were available for you in your community as a young musician?
Well, right from the start, my parents were very, very supportive of any musical aspirations I had. My mom played the piano casually, and my parents are both music appreciators. So from a very young age, I remember every Saturday afternoon, the opera would be on the radio. My brother, who's 6 years older, played the piano, and wanting to be just like him, I begged my parents at the age of 4 to play the piano. So they looked around actually and found a teacher who was willing to take on this little 4-year-old who wasn't yet in school. And it just kind of took off from there.
And can you tell me about some of the musical development that took place in your early years?
A big thing in Nova Scotia in general is the choral scene, the choral environment. So from the age of probably 8 or 9, I was in a youth choir and continued that right up through into my master's, actually, always singing in choirs, always being a part of that environment. We lived on a farm in a rural situation, but we were very close to some bigger towns, especially Wolfville, Nova Scotia, where Acadia University is. It's kind of a hub, especially for the classical world in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. So that's where I started my first choir, was actually the Acadia Youth Choir for ages 7 to 12, 13. So it was a lot of traveling to other towns to be a part of these ensembles.
How soon did composition enter into your musical space?
Very early, actually. Probably around the age of 9 or 10. I started just by making up short pieces on the piano, mostly just for my own sake. I just had these ideas and just figured them out. And it wasn't for any specific purpose or anything. It was just a natural thing. And I actually remember my first piano teacher. I brought a piece to her when I was very young, and I didn't see what the big deal was about it. And I actually remember saying, everyone does this. And she said, no, not everyone does this. It's a very special thing. So that kind of planted a seed, and it's something that I've always held on to because I feel I have a natural affinity towards having musical ideas in my mind, and more importantly, having a need to express them and a need to share them with whoever will listen.
At what point did your composing go from something that you were doing for yourself to something you started to share with others?
Yeah, I remember it very specifically, actually. The first piece I ever wrote for choir was a piece for piano and choir. And my high school music teacher at the time gave me a pamphlet for the Vancouver Chamber Choirs competition because they had a high school category. And not even knowing the kind of gravity of the event, I sent in the piece and ended up winning. And they performed the piece and talked about the piece. And I got a great letter with feedback of things that might be changed and parts of my style that they really liked. And that was kind of a shocker because I was, again, not doing it for any specific purpose. I just wrote this piece because I had an idea. I was dabbling in poetry as a young teenager as well, so I wrote the text for this piece. And yeah, I remember after winning, my music teacher said, "This is a big deal. Like, you take a hold of this and just keep it in your memory and use it as inspiration moving forward." Composition's always been an important part of my musicality, but it's never been the main one. It's never been the focus. That being said, all of my piano teachers have been very, very supportive of my writing, and they have all, just been very encouraging of the creative part of composing and writing.
So while you were going through this high school system and getting your music out there and taking lessons, when did you kind of make the turn and decide that you were going to pursue music beyond high school and take it as a course of study?
As a young teenager, I went through a period of just despising playing the piano. I was really into sports. I mean, going through junior high and high school is never easy, I don't think. But yeah, I'd much rather be out on the soccer field than sitting at the piano. So probably in my mid-teenage years, something just clicked. I mean, I just woke up one day and just saw what this music was meaning to me. And shortly after that, I switched teachers. And my second piano teacher ever was actually the teacher I did my undergrad with, Ron Tomarelli. He kind of guided me into the university scene at Acadia. And it was a very easy transition into that. But as for the moment of inspiration, it's kind of a mystery. I just woke up one day knowing very calmly that this was what I wanted to do, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to do anything else. But the path guiding you into Acadia was then pretty clear, because I'm guessing while you were having lessons with this professor, you were already exposed to the environment there, to the building, to some of the faculty, and you're getting a sense of what you could expect if you'd follow that path. Yeah, absolutely. I was already fairly familiar with Acadia University in general because my dad was a professor there for 3 decades. So I grew up on the campus, but also going to piano lessons in the music school. I started to know some of the faculty and some of the other students. I was actually playing in university master classes when I was still in high school. So I got to meet some of the other students that way. And it's the only university I auditioned for in my undergrad, which in retrospect I should have done other ones to kind of boost up the scholarship money, but because they knew I was going there, so they knew they didn't have to offer me very much. But no, it was a very easy transition. Yeah, and I was very comfortable with the teacher. We got along very, very well. I owe so much to him for setting up such a strong foundation for my playing, both technically and musically. So as you look back on those years, can you identify some of the key developments that you made in your musicianship during that time? Yeah, it feels like a very long time ago. I was a very different musician and a very different person back then. But the focus on performing was a big deal, mostly with my teacher. He encouraged us to perform all the time whenever we could, regardless of the situation, and to always perform at a high standard. Acadia was also where I became interested in new music. When I was a student there, they started the Shattering the Silence New Music Festival, which is now in its, 7th, 8th year. And they brought in new artists and commissioned new works and had new ensembles created. So we were exposed to a lot of new music, and that became very important later on, actually. At the end of my undergrad, I was fairly burnt out. I wasn't even sure that I was going to continue and do another degree. So I went traveling for a bit, spent a few months in New Zealand, and for the first time in years, probably a decade, I didn't touch a piano for 3 or 4 months, uh, which I think at the time was a very, very good thing. And then I took a full year after Acadia to kind of plan ahead, figure out where I wanted to go, work on a program, do a little bit of collaborative work. But the break was definitely a good idea.
And you stayed in Nova Scotia during that year?
Yeah, I stayed in Wolfville actually. So I went immediately from being a student to working with some of the profs, being the musical director for a couple of their productions, working with different students, teaching a little bit, and then just working on my own solo repertoire.
Can you talk a bit about the advantage of being in a small school like that? Of course, you earned these opportunities when you finished your degree, but you're also, I think, able to take on kind of projects and maybe more important roles than you might have access to in a larger school.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Acadia is very known for reaching out to former graduates, and I think it's a trust thing. I mean, all the profs there kind of saw how I went through my degree, how I went about my work, and the kind of the level I was working at. But the small school environment was very good for me at that time. I think if I were to have gone away and done my undergrad at a larger school, I might have gotten buried a little bit. Just in regards to my personality, I think I needed the support system, needed the opportunities, and needed the time and the space to really grow and to strengthen what I was doing.
So as you're taking this year away from school, how do you decide what your next step should be?
As an undergrad at Acadia, I played a masterclass for David Jalbert. And it was I didn't know this at the time, but it was a very inspiring moment and something I would remember for a long time. And the idea kept getting stronger in my mind that I wanted to study with him. I'd listened to his first few recordings a lot, his Foray Nocturnes, Shostakovich, Preludes and Fugues, and was so inspired by these recordings. And the more I listened to them, the more excited I got about the possibility of studying with him. So I did a full audition tour for my master's, 4 or 5 different schools. But I think throughout the whole process, it was just for show. And I knew if I got into Ottawa U, I would be going there.
So that ended up working out for you in the end. You got into the University of Ottawa.
Yes.
How was that experience? Can you try to summarize your development and your growth in those 2 years?
It was a period of huge development, many, many challenges, working on a lot of solo repertoire, concertos and full programs, lots of etudes. And in addition to that, I started a trio. I was working as a repetiteur with the opera company there. Continued to work with a couple of choirs, the chamber choir and the mass choir. Learned pieces like the Brahms Requiem, which will always be amongst my favorite music. During the summers when I was living in Ottawa, that's when I got back into composing. It's when I felt like I was at a stage in my life where I had something to offer again, musically. And I can remember spending hours and hours in the very quiet school in the summertime, just spending time with music and writing and experimenting. And yeah, it was a period of huge growth for me.
For musicians of your level, I think the transition from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree is kind of self-evident. I think what's maybe less obvious is the transition from a master's to what comes next. That's something I'm negotiating now. I think it's something that many people are negotiating. So what did you feel like when you finished your master's, and how did you decide what to do immediately afterwards?
I think it had always been an idea in my mind that I wanted to do a doctorate at some point. If you would have asked me when that would be when I first graduated my master's, I would have said a decade. I was, again, very burnt out. It's taken a long time to find a balance in the academic world. I'm one who dives into projects with absolutely every ounce of energy I have and every bit of focus I have. So sometimes when those projects end, I crash. So I wasn't quite sure when I was going to do the doctorate. And because of that, I decided to move back to Halifax and in a way wanted to prove to myself more than anything that being a professional musician was a viable future.
What kind of projects did you do during those kind of transitional years?
I was, again, doing a little bit of everything. I was working part-time at Acadia University and also at Dalhousie University in Halifax, working as a collaborative pianist, as a coach, as a repetiteur. I was musically directing the productions at Acadia. I was working with a wonderful ensemble, the Zara Choral Theatre, which is a women's ensemble, young women's ensemble, who blends movement and story, narrative, dance, music. I did know that I wanted to keep pushing myself and keep learning music. And that's when the Eckhart Grammatik competition comes in. The timing was perfect. I was really interested in some of the music that applied for the competition. And yeah, just kind of on a whim, put in a couple of months of really hard work to make a good application and sent it in and was accepted into it. And that's when I met you.
Sure. Can I just ask you about competitions kind of generally?
Yeah.
Why bother? What is the motivation? Like, what inspires you to take that jump?
Especially for me as a fairly competitive person, there's this drive the competitions kind of create in me that get me to do things that I normally just would not take as far. That being said, I think they have to be approached in a healthy way to know that you can play the best you've ever played, and you can think that you've played better than anyone else in the competition and still not even place. I mean, it's totally up to the jury, and I think all we can do is just go in and do our thing, and then whatever happens, happens. That's not to worry about. As for composition, it's a similar thing. The kind of possibilities for composing are so wide-ranging that competitions have really helped me focus in to have parameters like an ensemble size or a time length or even kind of style guidelines or difficulty guidelines have helped me complete pieces in a timely manner, have helped me kind of get quicker at my craft, or just they've helped me work through some projects that I wouldn't necessarily have finished. That being said, I have maybe a half dozen wins, but for every one of those wins, there are 10 thank you for entering our competitions. So it definitely also gets you used to rejection in a small way.
So let's go focus in on IG right now since we've brought this up. Just because it's an experience that we shared together, I'm just curious about your perception of that event and what you took away from that weekend.
The actual weekend was very, very exciting to be able to meet the other competitors, to be able to see this atmosphere that I'd heard so much about through my university career, to be able to see it in first person and just be around such excitement over new music. It's not something you see every day, and I think it's a very special event and a very special competition.
So you mentioned not being certain about doctoral studies. As we're speaking now, I know that you are enrolled in a doctoral program. So how did you make that decision to go and pursue a doctoral program?
In my summers, after moving back to Halifax, I would go to the Orford Arts Centre in Quebec as a chance to keep having things to strive for, keep working on my technique and the solo rep. And that's where I met Menali Pritsade, who I'm now studying with at the University of Montreal. And I studied with her 3 straight summers at the Orford Arts Centre. And every summer she would keep dropping hints saying, you know, I'd love to have you as a doctoral student. All you have to do is send us a tape. But I ended up auditioning in person. And yeah, for a couple of years now, I've known that she and we get along very well. She's such a wonderful teacher. And I knew I wanted to study with her. And auditioned and very quickly got in and moved within a couple of months. And and here I am.
And how have the first months of this new program been for you?
It's been so exciting. The move has been very unsettling in a good way, kind of challenging me to reassess my lifestyle, my learning style, why I'm in this program is a big thing as well. Just kind of trying to figure out the plan for the next few years. I spoke next to no French when moving here, so that's also been a challenge, but I've been working very hard to remedy that. But the school has been wonderful. The classes have been great. I've just adored having lessons with Manali, and the work we've been doing has been really incredible. Having the time to work and practice my own rep has been a huge luxury as well. After working several years in the collaborative world, you don't get that much time when learning pieces for undergrad students.
Sure. And how is the environment at the University of Montreal?
It's very comfortable, but with such a high standard of performance, which I really appreciate. I've been in atmospheres and at schools and programs where the high level of performing translates into the social sphere. So the social sphere is also a competition and just very stressful. But that's not the case at all at the University of Montreal. Everyone is so encouraging, so supportive. The number of times I walk down the practice room hallway and see people playing for each other and getting input and that sort of thing, it's really encouraging. The professors are all very, very supportive and very caring and always want to help out and always are supportive. And even being an Anglophone, I've never felt ostracized. I've never felt out of place. Anyone who I've been in contact with is very appreciative when I've been trying to speak French, and even though you're bound to make mistakes learning a new language, they've always been very supportive in that regard. So it's a great school, and I'm very happy to be here and to set up shop here for a few years and be able to use it as a launching pad to whatever projects I do and wherever I do them.
So you're now kind of locked in this very demanding high performance program where piano is certainly going to be a major focus of your musical output for the next few years. How do you see your composition fitting into this new context?
It's already taken off. I feel like I'm on a whole different level with the composing now. I feel like I've gotten to a point where I've developed enough of a unique style that I know how to work within it, and I know the ideas that I want to push across in my composing. I just finished my first piece for solo piano. I'd been terrified to write for piano for the longest time just because there's such a huge repertoire over hundreds of years, and I always felt like I was directly imitating someone. But I finally got to a point where I just said, you know what, it's gonna be rough. It's gonna be a challenge, but I just needed to explore it. And I spent weeks with this piece figuring out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it. Just on a side note, I feel like I have a fairly obsessive personality. When I really want to do something, I do it. I think I've mentioned just all in. And the only aspect of my life that I let that have full reign at the current time is when I'm composing. So when I start writing, the people who are closest to me know that I probably won't be a real human for a little while. I often disappear, and it becomes the only thing I can think of. So I even stop practicing the repertoire I'm doing in school. So it's a dangerous thing. I have to be very careful when I start composing at this point. But it's very exciting. I haven't felt this inspired as a composer in a very long time.
Well, I'm excited for you. It sounds like you've got a lot on your mind in Montreal, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot happening for you the next couple of years. It's pretty cool. Edward, we've got a recurring segment on this podcast called the Mr. Rogers Memorial Wonderful Person of the Day. So if you could take the time to tell me about somebody who's helped you become the musician and the person that you are, I think that'd be really nice.
Ooh, there's so many. There is one man who I worked with at the University of Ottawa, Lawrence Awashko. He's a director of choral studies there. He has some voice students. we worked very closely with the chamber choir, with the mass choir. We did a few gigs at the National Arts Center with their chorus. And I remember working with Lawrence, he always did everything with every ounce of his being. And when working musically with students, he really encouraged to make it just a part of every part of your life, whatever you're studying in music. And I remember him specifically in one rehearsal getting upset with the choir we were working with. They were being a little bit lazy, but even though that was annoying him, the bigger point was that he believes we have a very strong responsibility as musicians to always work as hard as we can and to really bring beauty into the world. And that's something that, even though he was a choral director and a singer, that's something I've carried into my piano music and my composing, to just always work as an artist as hard as you can with every ounce of your being. He's a really wonderful man and was really inspiring in my time in Ottawa.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Are you still in touch with him?
Yeah, I send him an email every once in a while to letting him know what I'm up to, and he's always so supportive. And even since graduating, he's performed 4 of my works with his choirs. He said whenever I complete something for choir to send it along, and he'd love to give some feedback. So having that support and that encouragement has been great as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Finally, Edward, we'll get you off the hot seat here right away. How can the listeners of this podcast find you and follow your activities?
I have my own website at edwardenman.com. I keep it regularly updated with dates and news that's going on, where you can see me perform. I'm also on Facebook, Edward Enman, very simple. Yeah, that's about it.
Great. Edward, thank you so much for all this time. It's been wonderful to talk to you and catch up a little bit. Have a great time in Montreal this year. It's really exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, that is it for this episode of All Ears. As always, thank you so much for listening. You can follow me on Twitter at evhopf, that's EVHOPF. For information about the show, you can follow at This Is All Ears. All Ears headquarters can be found at my website, that's everetthopfner.com. You can check the archive for show notes and links about all my previous guests and for updated blog posts. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. If you like the show, tell somebody about it. Like the likes, tweet the tweets, share the shares, recommend the recommendations. That's the thing you can do. Alright folks, All Ears will be back in November. Talk to you then, looking forward to it.